important to state that we are looking for different courses. That what implies that we have different backgrounds about research. Later in the process, we had Raul as our advisor, and it was important to start knowing more about qualitative research. Along the process of tutoring, Raul said our interest of continue expanding our experience on research and also on literacy. Then he invited us to work with him in the OSL3 project, and one of those first ideas to work on was to design the research course. The first step that we had for this design was to meet and discuss on important issues about this course, the number of hours, how the session will be held, and also the dynamic that we were going to have in the process of the design. The first step after that was that he sent us an invitation to work in Google Drive in the syllabus, and we shared there maybe the references that as students and novice teachers we can novice researchers we can share with the students that are in the course. In that fight, we also had the opportunity to create some discussions around some topics that the other teachers' assistants around propose, always keeping in mind that we were a team and the respect for the other's ideas. There we also typed our doubts, our comments, and our opinions. At the same time, we had a chat group in Facebook where we interact permanently with some updates about the course and also help us to have some discussions about topics that come to our minds during this process. Some days after, we met again to discuss the last version of the program and to refine the last details for the class.
Well, the preparation for the research courses is a very closer activity that we do as community, and where Dr. Mora is always conducting and guiding. He is the leader of the classes, and he is a kind of mentor for me and for my colleagues to learn not only to research but also to learn how to teach researching and how to becoming a better research. So every class or every course is different than others because of students' experiences and because the course is unique. What the course pretends is to encourage students to create and to build an identity as a future researchers, and that's we are doing as a community right now, creating and building a research identity where Dr. Mora is our leader.
I looked through all of the notes on a Sunday morning, I think at my favorite coffee shop, with the intention to kind of relive my experience from the research course. While reading through everything that I found in the folder, I constantly asked myself questions like, what did the professor or I miss during this course that could have helped make my research experience a bit smoother? What parts of my research did I particularly struggle with that could have been further unpacked and explored during the research course? And most importantly, I asked myself, how can I help these students avoid the frustrations that I dealt with while I was completing my research for graduate school? When we began collaborating on the course syllabus, I was really drawn to the first assignment that Raul had proposed. It was a paper answering the questions, who am I as a researcher and why do I need this research? This assignment brought me back to the time when I was finishing my thesis, and I decided to write a final section titled, A Personal Reflection, The Influence and Impact of Childhood. On these 2 pages of my thesis, I described how conducting my research project and completing my thesis had been a process of awareness raising, not only for my students, as I had built my work on critical literacy, but even more so for myself. I described how my graduate studies and research had led me to reflect upon my own childhood as an English learner in the States. It's really unfortunate that I had not identified how my past had influenced me as a researcher from the very beginning of my research. Now I feel that essentially it was my childhood experience that had pushed me in the direction of exploring and researching critical literacy. Reading the first draft of the proposed syllabus, I realized that the reflection piece that I had added on to the very ending of my thesis was very much similar to the first assignment that Raul had proposed for the research course. I saw such an importance and power behind this assignment that during the research course this past semester, I told my mentees to save this text. I encouraged them to look back at it once they had finished their writing and to see how they could possibly weave it into their own thesis. Originally, when I had written my thesis, I had added this reflection piece to the end of my writing, but taking into account a recommendation made by one of the members of my thesis committee, I told my mentees last semester to be sure to place this reflection at the very beginning of their thesis because it allows readers to better understand someone's work and the reasons behind it. When I first started working with Raul, not even as his mentee, but just as his graduate student, he was constantly talking about his idea that anyone conducting research should always walk around with a fancy notebook and pen. I took Raul's advice and I used these 2 tools to start my thesis journal. I used my thesis journal from the very onset of my research experience until the very end. I used the journal to jot down anything and everything that inspired and motivated me during that time. I wrote down inspirational quotes that I would come across. I created numerous timelines in it. Mostly I would use it to organize the endless amounts of scattered thoughts and ideas that I had during the time of researching and writing my thesis. I want to share with you all the first entry that I ever wrote into my thesis journal. It's a quote by Malala Yousafzai, and it says, "Let us pick up our books and pens. They're the most powerful weapons. One child, one teacher, one book, and one pen can change the world." First page. During the planning stages of the course, I discussed my thesis journal with Raul and asked him if we could include something similar to it, and so we eventually wove it into the course assignments.
Before starting with the course, with the first insight class, we received from Raul the instructions to mentor some students. So our responsibility was to help those students in case they need it. And this file was also shared with them, with the students. And finally, the first day, finally, the grade day arrived, and we started the course. During the session, not all the teachers assistants could attend, but we were always keeping in touch with what was happening in the course.
I would describe the mentoring that Raul set up between the TAs and the grad students almost like the relationship that siblings have. I think the grad students were really able to open up to us and share their concerns, their struggles and fears with the TAs because they knew that we had gone through all of that first. I wanted to take on the role as a mentor through the eyes of a big sister. I wanted to just be able to share all of the things that I had already learned out on the battlefield with my mentees so that they wouldn't have to spend time learning it for themselves, and so that maybe they could avoid making the same mistakes that I had made. Although it was very clear to me that they would eventually make mistakes of their own. I shared some things with my mentees that I had come up with while I was conducting my own research, which I felt had made my life just a little bit easier. For example, I told my mentees to take notes of what they read in a Word document. Personally, I have always been a classic paper and pen type of person. I really need to write things down by hand in order to better understand them, in order to better make them stick in my head. And when I started the process of reading tons and tons of texts for my literature review, initially I took all of the notes down by hand. So about 15 texts in, I realized that I would eventually need to go back to all of these handwritten notes that I had been taking to actually plan and write chapter 2. And rereading all of those handwritten notes over and over again was just not going to work in favor of the limited time that I had to write my actual thesis. I then decided to create a digital reading matrix in which I took notes of each text that I read for my thesis. This way, when I needed to find certain information on a certain topic, I would just open the document and digitally search for a keyword or an author. This little switch in my methods allowed me to go back to the text that I read in a more effective and efficient manner. I think had someone shared this little tip with me from the onset of my research, my life would have been slightly a bit easier, especially when it came to figuring out how to keep track of all of the texts that I had to read in order to write my thesis. Another tip I shared with my mentees was the importance and value of researching student-centered topics as opposed to teacher-centered topics. One of my mentees that I was working with was really interested in researching the use of online communities and how teachers could use them in English learning classrooms. During one of our mentor-mentee meetups, I explained that qualitative research should not be a how-to guide or a recipe for others to follow in search of quote-unquote best practices. And that when we focus research on teachers, that's what could end up happening. During our conversation, I encouraged her to stick to her topic if it was really something that she was passionate about, but just to change the approach or the perspective that she wanted to take towards researching the topic, making it more student-centered as opposed to teacher-centered. I think it was these small and intimate encounters between the TAs and the mentees that I think opened up a space for the graduate students to better understand how to conduct qualitative research.
Once I started my diploma course and my master program in teaching second languages, I was a little bit scared because my background was more in teaching art than in teaching languages. Well, I was teaching art for more than 10 years, and I wanted to move to teach English, and I realized the importance of teaching second languages as a matter of be well prepared as teacher, and that is not enough to speak the language. So looking for a better academic preparation, I found an opportunity to grow up not only as a teacher but also as a researcher, because I got a really nice experience being part of a community where we prepared the research classes, where we put all our experiences together in a classroom, where the researching classes become into something meaningful for my career, and where I discovered a whole world which I call the expanded aesthetic of literacy as a result of my research process, or as the process I continue with researching in this community.
Essentially, the research course that I took part in as a TA was an introductory course to qualitative research. And I think the very act of going back to the basics really allowed me to further solidify the foundation of qualitative research that I've built. Experiencing this course for a second time around allowed me to see the need to take L2 research beyond the confines of L2 research. The topics that the students initially wanted to focus on were just boring and a bit played out. They'd already been researched. My experience this time around really allowed me to understand that we need to push students into considering that L1 research can actually influence their L2 research studies. This was something that I had already learned through my own research experiences, but I wish I would have had the chance to have learned it when I had taken the same course the first time around. As an early childhood educator, I'm very well aware of the fact that humans, especially the youngest of us, are innately curious and inquisitive. My students, they learn best by conducting their own inquiries, testing hypotheses, and drawing conclusions. This course kind of brought me back to that and really forced me to relearn what I already knew about people and research, which is that research is essentially everything that we do as kids, but we start to lose through traditional schooling. Because of this experience as a TA in a qualitative research course, I have not only developed as a research educator, but also as an early childhood educator, because I've been reminded of the importance of opening up those spaces for my students, no matter their age, to conduct their own inquiries and research.
As novice researchers and teachers in the master's program, it's worth to have a mentor, and Raúl has been always present in both processes, what has helped us to continue working together independently on the different courses that we are taking or the research studies that we conduct. This experience of preparing the course together has been enriching because we have lived from very first hand what collaborative work is and how all opinions are valuable at the moment of taking the course. For my next experience, that is preparing my first course for the master's program, I am sure that I will ask this team to give me a hand to improve the design of my course, since we all four have different experiences not only in research but also in our teaching process. I think I will also take the experience of using Google Drive, because I have observed that this tool helps the students to share feedback and this enrich their learning process, and at the same time they can have all the assignments in the same place and share some of the references that they use for their personal issues. Talking about references, I will provide my students with enough references to read for the different sessions, but also to go deeply in those topics that most call their attention. I think that in this research course, students have enough readings to expand those topics assigned in the class, and they also use them for other purposes during the master's program.
Working under an experienced professor like Raul only brings benefits to those who are lucky enough to be given the opportunity. This experience has better prepared me to take on a graduate research course of my own, mostly because of the time that I had to observe Raul and how he teaches and guides his students through this initial part of their research projects. By no means do I feel like I'm fully prepared to take on this course, especially not as smooth and assertive as Raul has taught the class, but I do feel that I had the chance to improve my teaching by observing his teaching. I also feel more comfortable with planning for the course as I took part in designing this one. The way I see it, my future students will be just as scared and lost as I will be when facing this course. However, as a research educator, I know that those feelings are a strong part of qualitative research. The not knowing what's going to happen and not knowing if you're doing it right. Throughout my own experience as a graduate student, I had the opportunity to reach out to some people from previous cohorts, and they were always willing to share their advice and their personal experiences with me. I feel that experiencing this course as a TA was very satisfying for me, as it was a way for me to give back to my academic community.